Lena sat quietly at the kitchen table, the hum of the fridge louder than her parents' silence. No one remembered. Outside, the morning sun filtered through the blinds in soft stripes, landing on the linoleum floor that had yellowed just enough to suggest it had once been brighter. Inside, the kitchen carried the scent of burnt toast and weak coffee. Diane stood by the sink, her sleeves rolled halfway up her forearms, as she scrolled on her phone, occasionally glancing toward the window. Gerald, across from her, buried his face in the local paper, nodding along to an editorial only he could hear. The radio murmured in the background, some AM channel playing Sinatra too low for anyone to actually enjoy. Lena shifted in her seat. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, the way she'd been taught. She waited for someone to look up, to say something. But the only voice that filled the room belonged to Charlotte, who had just floated in from upstairs, hair curled and perfume still clinging to the hallway behind her. "Mornin'," Charlotte chirped, sliding onto the stool beside the counter island. "Did the mail come? I'm still waiting for my RSVP from Columbia's thing." "Not yet, sweetheart," Diane said, finally putting down her phone. She reached over to pat Charlotte's shoulder. "You're going to need a white dress for the gala, though. I was thinking of that off-the-shoulder one we saw at Macy's last week." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. "Or maybe the one from the boutique on Main. Becca said they just got a new shipment." The conversation rolled on without pause, without detour. Lena stood up slowly, moved toward the toaster, and pulled out 2 pieces of overdone bread. Both hers, she supposed. No one had asked for any. She poured herself a mug of hot water and dropped in a peppermint tea bag. Her favorite. No milk, no sugar. The scent rose gently as she walked back to the table and sat again, listening to the rustle of the paper, the chirp of Charlotte's phone, the clink of Diane's spoon against her cereal bowl. Still nothing. Her phone buzzed once. She glanced at it, heart lifting for a second. "Becca, happy birthday. Lena, wish I was there to hug you." Lena didn't reply right away. She just stared at the message, reading it twice, 3 times. A tiny balloon of warmth pushed against the quiet ache in her chest. In the living room, Gerald folded his newspaper and stretched. "So, we've got the tent company coming at 2. They'll set up in the backyard, and the DJ's dropping off the speakers by 4. "For Charlotte's party?" Lena asked softly. 3 pairs of eyes looked at her, as if she'd spoken out of turn. Gerald blinked. "Of course." Diane smiled tightly. "It's her graduation, Lena. We want to make it special." Charlotte glanced over, eyebrows slightly raised. "Is something wrong?" "No," Lena said quickly, dropping her eyes to her mug. "Just wondering." After breakfast, she walked the 2 blocks to school, her backpack light, her mind heavy. At each corner, she passed neighbors she knew by face but not by name. One man was watering his petunias. A woman brushed leaves off her porch swing with a broom that had more handle than bristle left. They all nodded politely. No one said anything special. At school, everyone was talking about the party. Some kids were helping with decorations. Others were coordinating a group photo surprise. Lena sat through her classes with her head down, doodling lines along the margins of her notebook, little spirals and clouds, and the outline of a cupcake she would never eat. By the time the last bell rang, the sky had turned gray with the kind of summer overcast that felt like a secret waiting to spill. She walked home slower than usual, hoping maybe something, anything, would shift before she got back. The house was quiet when she stepped inside. Diane was on the phone in the den, probably finalizing some order. Charlotte's laughter echoed faintly from her room upstairs. Lena tiptoed to the kitchen. She opened the freezer and stood in front of it for a long time. There, tucked behind a half-used bag of frozen peas and a tray of unbaked cookie dough, was a white cardboard box. The edges were curled and a little damp from years of frost. She slid it out slowly, gently brushed away the ice crystals clinging to its label. Lena, 16. The handwriting was her mother's, neat and lupin. She opened the box. The cake inside was lopsided, one corner slightly crushed. The frosting faded from soft pink to something closer to gray. One slice had already been removed, a forgotten gesture of last year's guilt. She didn't cry. Instead, she closed the lid and placed the box carefully back where it had been. Through the window, she saw her mother and Charlotte standing on the back patio, pointing to where the tent would go. Charlotte was laughing, Diane was nodding, both unaware of the girl watching them from behind the glass. "Maybe I'll forget it too," Lena whispered. A sudden clanging noise interrupted the moment, sharp, metallic, like someone had dropped a toolbox. It came from the house next door. She turned her head toward the fence line, where the grass was taller and unkempt. The old Albright house had been quiet for years. Until now, Lena stepped through the fence gate, heart racing. Not fear, just curiosity. The witch next door wasn't supposed to be real. The grass brushed against her calves as she moved deeper into the narrow space between the brook's neat lawn and the wild border of the Albright property. Most kids in the neighborhood avoided this yard, convinced it was haunted or worse, occupied by the old woman who once chased off trick-or-treaters with a broom. But today, curiosity outweighed myth. The clanging sound hadn't stopped. It rang out again, more like a stubborn piece of metal being coerced into place than any actual danger. A rusted trellis leaned against the back fence, covered in vines that smelled faintly like mint and dust. Lena stepped around it carefully, her sneakers crunching over dried magnolia leaves. The gate to the backyard was ajar, barely hanging on its hinges. She peeked through. The backyard of Mrs. Fern Albright looked like a forgotten garden that had decided to reclaim itself. Weeds pushed through the cracks in the stone path, and wind chimes tinkled softly from an old maple tree, their sound more melancholic than musical. In the center of it all stood a silver-haired woman on a rickety step ladder, one hand gripping the gutter, the other holding a dented watering can like a scepter. The ladder wobbled. The woman didn't seem to notice. Ma'am?" Lena called, stepping forward. The woman didn't turn right away, but the ladder creaked dangerously. Lena dropped her bag and rushed forward just in time to catch the watering can as it slipped from the woman's grip. Fern looked down, her face lined but alert. "Well," she said, voice dry. "Didn't think anyone still said ma'am around here." "You're going to fall," Lena said, glancing up at her. "Let me help you down?" Fern stared at her for a second longer, then gave a tiny nod and climbed down slowly. Once on the ground, she wiped her palms on her faded floral dress and took the watering can back without a word of thanks. Her eyes, gray like river stone, examined Lena as if measuring her honesty. "You live next door?" "Yes, ma'am." "Stop that." "Yes, okay." A long pause followed. Lena shifted from foot to foot. "I heard the noise. I thought maybe something had happened." "Just this gutter," Fern said, tapping it with her cane now. "It hasn't drained since Clinton was in office." Lena let out a quiet laugh, then immediately regretted it, unsure if she was allowed to find that funny. Fern didn't react. Instead, she turned and walked toward the back porch. The screen door groaned as she pushed it open with the tip of her cane. "Well," she said over her shoulder, "you coming in or just standing there collecting pollen?" Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and something else. Cedar, maybe. The furniture was old but well kept, draped with hand-sewn covers and lace runners. A small radio hummed softly from the kitchen counter, playing what Lena thought was a Glenn Miller track. The air was cool, dim, and surprisingly welcoming. Fern moved with purpose, placing the watering can on a wooden side table and disappearing into another room. Lena stood awkwardly in the doorway until Fern returned with 2 mugs and a pot of tea. "Hope you like peppermint," she said, pouring slowly. "It's the only thing that grows on purpose in this yard." Lena nodded, taking the warm cup in both hands. "You draw?" Fern asked, as if continuing a conversation Lena hadn't started. "Sometimes." "Hmm, I could tell." She gestured to a small side hallway. Curiosity pulled Lena toward it. The hallway opened into a sunroom where light streamed through tall, dusty windows. The walls were covered in paintings, some finished, others barely started. None were framed, just pinned or propped up, like they were still deciding whether they deserved to be seen. They weren't portraits or landscapes. They were moods, a hand reaching from shadow, a window open to stars, a child curled on a porch swing, watching rain. Lena stood, transfixed. "They're beautiful," she said softly. Fern leaned against the doorframe. Not beautiful, honest. She crossed the room, reached into a drawer, and pulled out a pad of thick paper and a tin of pencils. She handed them to Lena without fanfare. Try, she said. Lena sat down at the small desk near the window. The pencil felt heavier than it looked. She stared out at the garden, the cracked bird bath, the way the ivy curved around the fence. Slowly, she began to draw. Minutes passed, maybe longer. The only sound was the scratch of lead on paper and the occasional creak of wood as Fern shifted nearby. Lena didn't think, she just moved her hand. When she stopped, she had a sketch of the watering can sitting alone on the stepladder. Fern took the pad without asking and studied it. You've got the eyes, she said. Lena looked up, surprised. The eyes? The ones that see what's there, not just what's wanted. Fern walked to a narrow cabinet near the back of the sunroom, opened a drawer, and took out a long white envelope. She handed it to Lena, but didn't let go. Not yet, but someday. Her voice was low but steady. Lena nodded slowly, slipping the envelope into her backpack without looking at it. She didn't ask what was inside. Somehow, she already knew it wasn't for now. She finished her tea. Fern offered no further conversation, only a slow nod toward the door when it was time. Outside, the sky had shifted to a soft peach, the breeze carrying the scent of mint and wood smoke. Lena walked home in silence, the pad of paper tucked under her arm, the envelope hidden between her books, and something else, something she couldn't name yet, settled in her chest like the first brushstroke on a blank canvas. Bright balloons filled the backyard, people pulled up tables and chairs, the band tested the speakers, but no one called Lena's name. From her bedroom window, Lena watched as white folding chairs bloomed across the lawn like orderly flowers. Charlotte moved effortlessly among the crowd, laughing, giving instructions, hugging guests. The speakers crackled as a familiar country tune filtered out, and the scent of grilled hot dogs drifted up through the open window. She slipped into her jeans and the only blouse her mother hadn't frowned at, then tied her hair back in a loose braid. The house buzzed with noise, doors swinging open, laughter, the occasional squeal from a younger cousin she'd never met. Lena moved downstairs like a ghost, between echoes. In the kitchen, her mother stood arranging cupcakes on a tiered display. Lena, would you mind checking the drink table outside? I think we're running low on ice. Yes, ma'am, she said automatically. Diane didn't notice the faint edge in her tone. Lena stepped into the sea of people in the backyard. A man in a checkered blazer handed her an empty glass. Thanks, sweetheart. Lovely party you've put together. She smiled politely, but didn't correct him. Another woman gestured toward a stack of paper plates. Can you grab a few more from the kitchen, honey? Charlotte passed by, catching the interaction, and chuckled. Wow, you're really blending into the background. Maybe you should do this professionally. Lena said nothing. She walked toward the cooler, filled plastic cups with lemonade, and reminded herself to keep breathing. Lena! Becca's voice sliced through the noise like a soft violin note. She appeared beside her, dressed in a simple floral dress, her curls pinned back with a barrette shaped like a daisy. Happy belated, she whispered, pressing a small white box into Lena's hand. Lena opened it to find a single cupcake topped with vanilla frosting and a tiny gold candle already snuffed. I couldn't bring it yesterday, Becca said. My aunt had surgery, but I didn't forget. I never forget. Lena blinked hard. Thank you. They found a shady spot behind the garage where no one bothered them. Becca sat cross-legged on the grass while Lena picked at the edge of the cupcake wrapper. I'm sorry, Becca said after a while. About this party, it's not fair. Lena shrugged. It's just a party. Becca leaned her head on Lena's shoulder. You know, people notice more than they let on. Maybe not loudly, but they do. Lena didn't respond. The hum of the celebration continued behind them, glasses clinking, old men laughing, someone starting a speech near the tent. Lena excused herself quietly and slipped out the side gate. She walked slowly, past the mailbox with the peeling paint, past the hydrangea bush her mother always forgot to water. Her feet moved without thought, carrying her to the one place where silence didn't feel like absence. The Albright house was quiet. She tapped lightly on the screen door. It creaked open before she could knock again. Fern sat in the sunroom, brush in hand, but paused when she saw Lena. She gestured to the bench by the window without a word. Lena took a seat. She didn't explain why she'd come, she didn't need to. Fern stood, walked to a drawer, and handed her a slim wooden case. "Watercolors," she said simply. "Don't talk, just paint." Lena opened the case and laid out the colors. The paper in front of her sat blank for a moment. Then, slowly, lines began to form. A makeshift tent, too large for its space, balloons floating just out of reach, a girl in the corner holding a tray of drinks. She didn't stop until the page held what words couldn't. Fern examined the finished piece. "You didn't draw yourself in." "I did," Lena said. "I'm the one not looking at anyone." Fern didn't smile, but her voice softened. "That's still looking, you know. Just inward." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the last light of day settled over the houses like a worn quilt. Lena packed the paints away carefully. When she got home, most of the guests had left. Her parents were busy cleaning up. No one asked where she'd been. She slipped into the kitchen, opened the freezer, and took out the cake. The box felt heavier this time. She placed it gently on the counter, opened the lid, and stared at it for a long moment. Then she closed it again and left it there. The brush trembled slightly in Lena's hand until Fern whispered, "Just let it speak first. You listen." Light streamed through the tall windows of the sunroom, painting soft rectangles across the wooden floor. The air smelled faintly of mint tea and linseed oil. Outside, birds chattered somewhere in the tall trees that framed the backyard like an old photograph. Inside, there was no rush, only the slow rhythm of Fern's radio playing a distant Mozart melody and the steady beat of the clock above the mantel. Lena sat at a worn table pushed close to the glass. Before her was a fresh sheet of cold-pressed paper, blank but buzzing with quiet potential. The brush in her hand hovered above it, hesitant. Then she lowered it, dipped it gently into the dish of watercolors, and let her hand move. She didn't think about what she was painting, just shadows, light, shapes that felt familiar but unspoken. The outline of a porch swing, the curve of a watering can, the trace of laughter on a window pane. Behind her, Fern moved about quietly, adjusting a paint tray here, folding a cloth there. She didn't instruct or correct. She simply watched. "You've got a quiet line," Fern said finally. "Not afraid. Just listening." Lena looked up. "I don't know what I'm doing." "That's the best place to start." They fell into a comfortable silence again. Lena's strokes grew more confident, the shapes more defined. She wasn't drawing the backyard itself, but what it felt like, the calm, the gentleness, the fact that no one here mistook her for someone else. After a while, Fern poured 2 mugs of tea and settled into the armchair by the window. The steam curled around her lined face like smoke from an old story. She watched Lena for a moment, then said, "Did I ever tell you I used to teach?" Lena shook her head. "High school, article before this town forgot me." Lena looked at her. "They forgot." Fern sipped her tea. "They remembered what they wanted. I had a student once, bright, eager, talented. I shared everything with her. She won a big contest with a piece we worked on together, never mentioned me once. Said it was hers every inch." "I'm sorry." Fern waved it off. "That's life. People rewrite their stories, erase what doesn't serve the narrative, but that doesn't mean the truth goes away." Lena let the words settle like dust in the sunlight. She thought of her own mother, her father, Charlotte, the party, the silence. "I know what that feels like," she said quietly. Fern didn't press. Later, as Lena rinsed her brush and gathered her things, Fern stood and moved to a narrow cabinet tucked into the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and retrieved a long white envelope, sealed but creased with age. She held it out, but this time didn't let go right away. "This isn't a gift, it's a key. Whether you use it is up to you." Lena met her eyes. "What is it?" "A nomination for a fellowship. One I helped found a long time ago before they stopped using my name." Lena's fingers tightened around the envelope. "Why me?" Fern's gaze didn't waver. "Because you're the kind of quiet they don't hear until it echoes." Lena didn't know what to say, so she nodded, slipped the envelope into her bag, and looked around the sunroom one more time. It no longer felt like a place for forgotten things. It felt like a beginning. As she stood to leave, Fern reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a stubby pencil. She tucked it behind Lena's ear. "You're going to need this." Lena smiled, the kind that didn't have to be big to be real. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the wind chimes and carrying the faint scent of lavender and old books. She stepped down the porch stairs with careful steps, one hand brushing against the ivy growing along the railing. She didn't rush home. She didn't need to. In her backpack, the envelope rustled softly. Not heavy, not urgent, just ready. A thick white envelope with golden foil edges sat on the counter. Lena wasn't listed among the guests. She stared at the invitation for a long time, the gold embossing, catching the light like it had something important to say. The envelope had been opened already. Her mother must have assumed it was for Charlotte, like everything else. Inside, the list of student honorees for the annual Lakewood Hollow Gala was printed on heavy cardstock, Charlotte's name circled twice in pink ink. Lena scanned the page again. Her name wasn't there. In the corner, someone had scribbled, "Only immediate invitees may attend formal reception seating." The handwriting was neat, polished, probably the principal's secretary. She folded the card slowly, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it beside the toaster. Then she left the house without a word. The air outside was warm, but not enough to burn. The kind of quiet afternoon where everyone moved slowly, as if the sun had made them gentle. Lena walked the 3 blocks to school, the soft rubber soles of her shoes padding against the pavement. In the main office, the receptionist barely looked up. "Oh, Lena, Principal Tompkins said if you stopped by, to send you in." She nodded, knocking once before entering. Principal Tompkins sat behind a desk that looked too large for him. He wore the same gray sport coat every day and always smelled faintly of menthol and library dust. "Miss Brooks," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Come in." Lena sat down, spine straight. "I've been reviewing the final selections for the gala, and I wanted to speak with you directly." She didn't speak. He cleared his throat. "Your academic performance is solid, quiet. Your participation in extracurriculars, however, has been, well, minimal. That affects eligibility." "I understand. But," he added, reaching under a stack of folders, "I came across something interesting this morning." He placed a sheet of paper in front of her. It was a copy of her recent watercolor, the one Fern had encouraged her to finish. "This was submitted anonymously to the student gallery. I assume it was you?" Lena looked at it. "Yes." He studied her face for a long moment, then the paper again. "This speaks louder than most speeches I've heard from valedictorians." Lena said nothing. He folded the paper, tapped the edge gently on the desk, and said, "Art isn't loud, but it listens better than the rest of us." She nodded once, then stood. He called after her as she reached the door. "You have more presence than you think, Miss Brooks." She paused, then left. Later that afternoon, Lena stepped into the art room. It was empty save for the hum of the ventilation and the faint smell of turpentine. She walked slowly along the rows of easels until she reached her usual corner. Charlotte stood there. She turned when she heard the footsteps, a nervous flutter in her hands, as she adjusted the hem of her perfectly pressed dress. "I didn't know you were coming today," she said, glancing at the half-finished canvases. "I was just, I don't know, looking." Lena didn't respond. Charlotte picked up a small painting from the drying rack. It was a portrait, soft pencil outlines filled in with watercolors, pale shadows, and quiet hues. It was her, Charlotte, sitting alone on the edge of the school auditorium stage, shoulders slightly hunched, staring at the ground. "Did you draw this?" she asked. Lena nodded. Charlotte's voice cracked just a little. "Why would you draw me like this?" "Because I saw it," Lena said, "and I didn't look away." Charlotte stared at the portrait for a moment longer, then carefully placed it back where it had been. Lena reached into her backpack and pulled out a sealed envelope, the nomination from Fern. She placed it gently on Principal Tompkins' desk as she passed by his office on the way out. She didn't wait for thanks. She didn't need to. A small cupcake sat right in front of Lena's door with a handwritten message on it. "Happy birthday, whenever you're ready." She stood there for a moment, the morning sun soft on her face, the cardboard box glowing faintly under its cellophane lid. The frosting had held up despite the warmth, a neat swirl of pale blue, with a single sugar daisy resting at the center. Taped to the side was a note written in Fern's tidy, angular hand. She picked it up, turned it in her palms once, and smiled. Then, carefully, she opened the door and stepped inside. The house was unusually quiet. No one else was home yet. The gala had come and gone, leaving behind champagne glasses and forgotten heels, centerpieces drooping in their vases. Lena's absence hadn't been mentioned, not in the group photos, not in the after-party wrap-up, not even in Charlotte's too cheerful thank you post. But that was fine. She placed the cupcake on the kitchen counter, next to the still untouched box from last year. Then she reached for her backpack and pulled out the envelope, still sealed, still whole. She slipped on her shoes and walked to the school's front office, the path already familiar. Principal Tompkins was waiting, as if he knew she'd come. He rose when she entered, smiled, and gestured toward the empty chair. "I've already made a call," he said. "To the board. Told them I'm forwarding a nomination that comes from a very credible source." Lena raised an eyebrow. He chuckled. "Fern Albright was my art teacher when I was your age. I've never forgotten the way she told me my doodles were full of longing." He paused. She was right. He reached out and accepted the envelope with both hands, like it weighed something more than paper. "I'm proud of both of you," he said. Lena simply nodded and walked out. On her way home, she passed the front lawn, where Charlotte sat cross-legged in the grass, writing thank you cards with the kind of intensity only a scholarship-bound senior could muster. Their eyes met for a moment. No words passed between them, but there was something in Charlotte's face, not apology, not regret, just a kind of pause, like she'd finally stopped rehearsing the same old lines. Lena gave a small nod and kept walking. That evening, at the Maple Bean Cafe, the usual quiet buzz filled the air. Mugs clinked gently. The air smelled like cinnamon, vanilla, and the faint woodiness of old paneling. Lena arrived with a small paper bag in one hand and her sketchbook tucked under the other. At a corner booth, Fern was already waiting, sipping her tea with a faint air of detachment. Becca slid into the seat beside Lena moments later, her cheeks pink from the summer heat. "You didn't say it was a party," she said, teasing. "It's not a party," Lena replied. "Just people who remembered." They sat there, talking about small things, new books, old memories, the way the barista still forgot to offer extra napkins. Becca told a story about Lena rescuing a kitten in 6th grade. Fern listened quietly, then smiled. "You've always been the kind of person who sees what's missing before others notice it's gone," she said. Lena ducked her head, unsure how to respond. Fern reached into her bag and pulled out a black and white photograph. It showed a young woman, Fern, unmistakably, standing before a massive painting. She looked uncertain in the picture, not afraid, just quiet. "I thought they'd remember me for that," Fern said. "But that's not how memory works. People forget. But you," she tapped the photo, then looked at Lena. "Let them remember you right." Lena stared at the photo, then at Fern, then out the window, where golden light bathed the sidewalk and filtered through the cafe's dusty blinds. "Maybe next year I'll remember too." She took a bite of the cupcake. It was sweet, a little crumbly, and perfect. Even the quietest birthdays can leave behind the loudest lessons. In a world that often rewards the bold and overlooks the gentle, Lena found her strength not in being seen, but in seeing others and herself clearly. Sometimes the truest acts of kindness bloom in silence, where no recognition is asked and none is needed. Because, like a porch light left on in the dark, compassion doesn't ask who's watching, it just shines. And if this story has stirred something in you, perhaps take a moment to notice the quiet hearts around you. You never know which forgotten light might one day guide someone home.